Have you ever wondered what separates true worth from the glittering illusion of wealth? What happens when the person everyone dismisses as a failure is the one holding the winning ticket? At a lavish engagement party in Greenwich, Connecticut, under a canopy of fairy lights and the judgmental stares of high society, Elara Vance watched as her father and her new fiancé publicly humiliated her ex-husband, Liam Callahan. They called him a broke, dusty carpenter, a man with splinters under his fingernails and not a dollar to his name. The laughter echoed as Liam walked away, the final nail hammered into the coffin of their shared past. But what they didn't know, what no one could have possibly imagined, is that less than 24 hours later, that same broke carpenter would quietly and irrevocably become one of the wealthiest men in the country. This is the story of what happened next. The air at the Meadowood Country Club shimmered thick with the scent of money-blooming hydrangeas and expensive perfume. It was the kind of late summer evening in Connecticut that magazines write about: a sky bruised with violet and gold, the soft clinking of champagne flutes, a constant, delicate applause for the life Elara Vance had so carefully constructed. Her engagement party was by all accounts a triumph. Her father, Richard Sterling, a man who had clawed his way from middle management to a corner office overlooking Manhattan, stood beaming his hand proprietorially on the shoulder of her fiancé, Chad Kensington III. Chad was everything Richard had ever wanted for his daughter. His family wasn't just wealthy, they were Kensingtons. Their name was etched onto university libraries and museum wings. Chad himself was a vision of effortless privilege, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist as he regaled a captivated audience with a story about summering in the Hamptons. Elara smoothed down the silk of her custom-made dress, a pale silver that caught the light. She felt a familiar pang of anxiety tighten in her chest, a feeling she'd learned to suppress. This was it. This was the pinnacle. She had done it. She had traded up just as her father had always advised. She had left behind the quiet, uncertain life she'd shared with Liam Callahan. Liam. The thought of his name was like a stone in her shoe, a small, persistent irritation. Their life together felt like a black and white film compared to the vibrant technicolor of her world with Chad. Liam's world was one of sawdust-worn flannel shirts and the smell of wood varnish. He was a furniture maker, an artist who spoke of grain patterns and dovetail joints with a passion she once found endearing, but had grown to see as a quaint and ultimately unprofitable eccentricity. They had divorced 6 months ago. The proceedings had been swift and brutal, orchestrated by her father's legal team. Liam hadn't fought it. He had simply signed the papers, his face etched with a quiet sadness that had infuriated her. Why wasn't he angry? Why didn't he fight for her? It was as if he was accepting the narrative her father had spun, that he wasn't good enough, that he couldn't provide the life Elara deserved. "Darling, you're a million miles away," Chad said, his arm snaking around her waist. He kissed her temple, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. "Thinking about the honeymoon in Bora Bora." She forced a brilliant smile. "Of course, I can't wait." It was then that she saw him, standing near the grand entrance to the terrace, looking utterly and tragically out of place, was Liam. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, just a simple dark blazer over a crisp button-down shirt and jeans, clean, respectable, but in this sea of bespoke suits, it might as well have been rags. He was holding a small carved wooden box. A knot of dread formed in Elara's stomach. Richard saw him at the same moment, and his jovial expression curdled. "What in God's name is he doing here?" he hissed, loud enough for those nearby to turn. Liam's eyes found Elara's across the perfectly manicured lawn. He gave a small, hesitant nod, as if seeking permission to approach. Before she could react, her father was on the move with Chad, following a half-step behind, a smirk playing on his lips. "Callahan," Richard boomed his voice, dripping with condescension. You're a little off course, aren't you? The service entrance is around the back. A few people snickered. Liam's jaw tightened, but his gaze remained steady. Hello, Richard. I just came to drop something off for Ilara. She doesn't want it, Richard snapped. Whatever trinket you cobbled together in that dusty shed of yours, we're not interested. Chad stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Ilara, a symbolic claiming of territory. Look, pal, he said, his voice smooth and patronizing. I know things must be tough, but crashing a private party isn't the way to handle it. If you need a few bucks for the bus ride home, I can help you out. He made a show of reaching for his wallet. The humiliation was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. Ilara felt dozens of eyes on her watching, judging. This was her past. Her mistake laid bare for all to see. Why did he have to come here? Why did he have to do this to her? That won't be necessary, Liam said, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked past them, directly at Ilara. This belonged to my grandmother. She gave it to you when we got married. I thought you should have it. He held out the small box. It was the rosewood music box she had kept on her nightstand for years. She remembered the day his grandmother, a kind woman with flower-dusted hands, had given it to her, saying it had played her to sleep for 50 years. A memory, sharp and painful, flashed in her mind, a rainy Sunday, with Liam in their tiny apartment, the soft melody of the music box filling the air as they danced in the living room. I don't want it, Ilara heard herself say, the words sounding brittle and foreign. My life is different now. I don't have room for old things. The hurt that flickered in Liam's eyes was so profound it almost made her flinch. It was the look he'd had when she'd told him she was leaving, a look of quiet devastation. Chad laughed a short, ugly bark. You hear that, buddy? She's upgraded, from splinters and sawdust to marble and mahogany. Your ancient history. He turned to the crowd. Let's give a round of applause for Ilara's ex, the broke carpenter, who thought he could hang with the big boys. The laughter that followed was a wave of acid washing over Liam. He stood there for a long moment, the box still in his outstretched hand. His gaze on Ilara was unreadable, not angry, but something deeper, disappointed. He finally seemed to see her not the woman he had loved, but the person she had become standing beside her prize fiancé, bathed in the glow of her father's approval. He slowly lowered his hand, placed the music box on an empty table near the entrance, and turned without another word. As he walked away, his shoulders straight, Richard Sterling raised his glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings, he declared, and to leaving the past and its failures exactly where they belong. The crowd cheered. Chad kissed Ilara a hard, possessive kiss that tasted of champagne and triumph. And as the party swirled back to life around her, Ilara couldn't shake the image of Liam's retreating back. She had everything she had ever wanted, so why did she suddenly feel like she had lost something irreplaceable? She pushed the feeling down, burying it under the weight of her new perfect life. It was just a pang of misplaced guilt, she told herself. It would pass. The next morning, the world smelled of stale champagne and regret. Ilara woke with a dull headache, the ghost of the previous night's forced smiles still aching in her cheeks. Chad was already gone off to an early tea time with a banking associate. A note on his pillow simply read, "Great party, see you tonight." She wandered through her cavernous, art-filled apartment, the silence amplifying the emptiness she refused to acknowledge. Her phone buzzed with notifications, photos from the party posted on Instagram, congratulatory texts filled with diamond ring emojis. Everyone was celebrating her glorious future. So why did she feel so hollow? Meanwhile, 20 miles away, in a world that felt a million light years removed, Liam Callahan was in his sanctuary. The workshop was a cathedral of wood and light. The air was thick with the clean, sharp scent of pine and cedar. Sunlight streamed through the large, dusty windows, illuminating motes of sawdust dancing in the air like tiny stars. Here there was no judgment. There was only the honest truth of the wood in his hands. He was working on a rocking chair, shaping the headrest from a single piece of reclaimed oak. His movements were fluid, economical, the result of years of devotion to his craft. The rhythmic scrape of his handplane was a form of meditation, a way to sand down the rough edges of his own thoughts. Last night had been a fool's errand. He knew that now. He'd gone to the party, not to cause a scene, but to perform a final quiet ritual of letting go. Giving back the music box felt like closing a chapter, a return of something that no longer belonged to him. He hadn't anticipated the public crucifixion. The venom in Richard's voice, the smug cruelty on Chad's face, and worst of all, the cold dismissal in Alara's eyes. That was the cut that went deepest. The woman he had loved, who had shared his dreams in their small, cramped apartment, had looked at him like he was a stranger, a piece of garbage to be swept away. A sharp rap on the workshop's large sliding door startled him. He rarely got visitors, especially not on a Saturday morning. Wiping his hands on a rag, he pulled the heavy door open. Standing on the gravel driveway was a woman who looked as out of place as he had at the country club. She was in her late 60s, dressed in a severe but impeccably tailored grey suit. She held a leather briefcase, and her expression was one of polite, unshakable neutrality. Behind her, a black town car, a Lincoln Continental, idled silently, its polished surface reflecting the rustic chaos of his workshop. "Mr. Liam Callahan?" she asked. Her voice was crisp, professional. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Evelyn Hayes. I am a senior partner with the law firm of Hayes Cromwell and Sterling. I was your grandfather's attorney." Liam froze. He hadn't spoken to his grandfather, Arthur Callahan, in over a decade. The old man was a titan, a legend in the world of manufacturing and real estate, a man carved from granite and ambition. He was also the reason Liam had walked away from a life of immense privilege. Is everything okay?" Liam asked, a strange knot tightening in his gut. Ms. Hayes's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I am very sorry to have to inform you of this, Mr. Callahan. Your grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep late last night." The news didn't hit Liam like a wave, but like a slow, creeping flood. Grief, sharp and complicated, mingled with years of unresolved anger and regret. Their falling out had been monumental. Arthur had wanted Liam to join the family empire, to learn the art of the deal, to become a predator in a suit. Liam, drawn to the quiet integrity of working with his hands, had refused. He had chosen a different path, and in Arthur's all-or-nothing world, that was the ultimate betrayal. "You can build your little wooden toys," Arthur had roared in their final conversation, "but don't you dare come asking for a single damn penny. From this day forward, you are no grandson of mine." And he had kept his word. For 10 years, there had been nothing. Silence. "I see," Liam said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for telling me in person." "That is not the only reason I am here," Ms. Hayes continued, opening her briefcase. "I am the executor of his estate. My presence here this morning is to fulfill my first duty as mandated by his final will and testament, which was signed and notarized less than a month ago." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Mr. Callahan, your grandfather made a significant last-minute change to his will. He has disinherited all other potential beneficiaries. His sons, his daughter, everyone." Liam stared at her, confused. "What are you saying?" Evelyn Hayes looked him directly in the eye, her professional veneer unwavering. "I am saying that Arthur Callahan has named you the sole heir to his entire estate. The businesses, the properties, the stock portfolios, the trusts, everything." Liam felt the world tilt on its axis. He leaned against the doorframe, the rough wood grounding him. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. "That's not possible," he stammered. "He hated me. He disowned me." His final instructions were very clear, Ms. Hayes said calmly. She pulled out a thick envelope sealed with wax. This is a personal letter he left for you to be delivered with the news. The official reading of the will is scheduled for Monday, but he was insistent that you be informed immediately and privately. She handed him the envelope. His name was written on the front in his grandfather's unmistakable, aggressive script. We have made a preliminary valuation of the liquid and tangible assets. She went on, her tone matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. While the numbers will fluctuate with the market, a conservative estimate of the net worth of the estate you are inheriting is approximately $9.7 billion. Billion. The word hung in the air, an impossible, absurd sound amidst the scent of sawdust and wood glue. $9.7 billion. Last night, he'd been mocked for not having enough money for a bus ticket. Today he could buy the bus company. He could buy the entire city. He looked from the letter in his trembling hand to the impassive face of the lawyer. He thought of his tiny apartment, the overdue bills on his counter, the constant low-grade stress of making ends meet. He thought of Richard Sterling's sneering face and Chad's patronizing laugh. And then he thought of his grandfather, the powerful, terrifying man who had cast him out. Why? After a decade of silence. Why this? As Ms. Hayes began to explain the next steps, the legal processes, the probate court, the immediate transfer of an interim operating fund, Liam's mind went quiet. He felt no elation, no sense of victory, only a profound, earth-shattering sense of vertigo. His life, the simple, honest life he had fought so hard to build, had just been demolished. In its place stood something vast, terrifying, and utterly unknown. He was no longer just Liam Callahan the carpenter. He was Liam Callahan, the billionaire. And he had no idea what that meant. The news of Arthur Callahan's death hit the financial world like a thunderclap. By 11 a.m. on Saturday, it was the lead story on the Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal websites. Industrial titan Arthur Callahan dead at 88. The headline screamed. Tributes poured in from titans of industry and political leaders. But it was the subheadline, the one buried in the second paragraph of the initial reports, that sent the real shockwave through the gilded corridors of power. Sources close to the estate indicate a shocking last-minute change to the will naming Callahan's long-estranged grandson as the sole beneficiary. In Greenwich, Richard Sterling was on the back nine of the Meadowood course when his phone started buzzing incessantly. Annoyed, he pulled it from his golf bag. It was a market alert from his private wealth manager. He opened it, read the headline, and felt the blood drain from his face. Arthur Callahan is dead, he said to his golfing partners, a trio of hedge fund managers. Damn, one of them said, removing his cap. End of an era. The man was a legend, built an empire from nothing. Richard didn't hear him. He was swiping frantically, his fingers clumsy. He found the article. He read the sentence about the long-estranged grandson. There was no name mentioned yet, but a cold, heavy dread was already congealing in his stomach. He knew of the feud. Everyone in their circle knew Arthur had a grandson who'd gone native, throwing away a golden ticket to play with wood chips. He made a call. His contact at a private equity firm that had dealings with Callahan Industries confirmed the rumor. It's true, Richard. The whole thing. They're saying the kid's name is Liam. Liam Callahan. Can you believe it? Arthur cut out his own sons for this carpenter. The word carpenter landed like a punch. Richard ended the call, his hand shaking. He looked out at the pristine green, the perfect, orderly world he had built for himself and his daughter, and felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated panic. The broke loser he had personally humiliated less than 12 hours ago. The man whose life he had helped dismantle. That man was now, for all intents and purposes, a king who held a personal, deeply felt grudge against him. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. He abandoned his game and sped home, his mind racing. Ilara. He had to get to Ilara. Ilara was in the middle of a session with her wedding planner, debating the merits of Casablanca lilies versus orchids when her father burst into her apartment, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Turn off the TV," he said, his voice tight. "No, wait, turn it on. Turn on CNBC. Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," he muttered, fumbling with the remote. "Much, much worse." The face of a financial news anchor filled the screen. An absolutely stunning development in one of America's great industrial dynasties. Arthur Callahan, who passed away last night, has left his entire multi-billion-dollar fortune to a single heir, his grandson, Liam Callahan. The wedding planner gasped. Elara just stared, her mind struggling to connect the name to the image on the screen. They showed a photo of Liam, an old one, from a college article about a student arts program. He looked so young, so full of the quiet idealism she had once loved. "Liam," she whispered. "My Liam." "He's not your Liam anymore," Richard roared, pacing the room like a caged animal. "He's the man we publicly eviscerated last night. The man we called broke. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The accusation hung in the air. What you've done, as if she were the one who had mocked him, who had orchestrated the entire cruel spectacle. The room started to spin. The scent of the flower samples on the table suddenly seemed cloying, nauseating. Billionaire. The word didn't compute. Liam, who used to patch his work boots with duct tape. Liam, who considered a splurge to be buying a rare piece of burl wood. Liam, who she had left because he couldn't give her a life like this, a life of security and status. The security she thought she had with Chad suddenly felt like a sandcastle in the path of a tsunami. Her phone rang. It was Chad. "Lara, baby, are you seeing this?" His voice was high-pitched, strained. The usual suave confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic energy. "Is this some kind of sick joke? The carpenter. Your ex. It's real, Chad. My father just told me." There was a pause on the line, filled with the sound of frantic typing. "His company, Callahan Industries. They hold a majority stake in the investment firm that backs my father's real estate fund. A majority stake." The implication was clear. Liam wasn't just some rich stranger. He was now indirectly Chad's father's boss. He held the strings to the Kensington family's financial puppet show. "Oh, my God," Elara breathed. "We have to fix this," Chad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have to fix this. Call him. Tell him it was all a misunderstanding. Your father was just drunk, blowing off steam. You know, guy talk. You were just overwhelmed. Apologize. Apologize." The memory of her own cold words from last night replayed in her mind. "I don't have room for old things." The look on his face. She felt a wave of nausea, so intense she had to sit down. It wasn't just regret she was feeling, it was a profound, soul-deep sickness. The choice she had made, which had seemed so logical and necessary, so celebrated and correct, was suddenly revealed to be the single greatest miscalculation of her entire life. She had traded a diamond for a shard of glass, and she hadn't even realized it until the whole world was watching. "Elara, are you listening to me?" Chad's voice was sharp, impatient. "Call him, now. We need to get ahead of this before he decides to pull the plug on my family's entire portfolio for fun." She hung up the phone, her hand trembling. Her father was still pacing, muttering about contracts and exposure. The wedding planner was quietly packing her things, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The beautiful, perfect future Elara had so carefully curated was fracturing before her very eyes, and in the center of the wreckage stood Liam, the quiet, gentle man she had thrown away, now more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Monday morning arrived grey and foreboding. The offices of Hayes Cromwell and Sterling were a fortress of mahogany leather and hushed reverence for old money. Liam, dressed in the only suit he owned, one he'd bought for his wedding, felt like an imposter. The silence in the boardroom was thick with tension. He sat at the head of the impossibly long table, with Evelyn Hayes to his right. Across from him sat the rest of the Callahan clan, his two uncles Robert and Marcus, and his aunt Eleanor. Their faces were masks of controlled fury and disbelief. They had barely acknowledged him, their eyes flicking over him as if he were a particularly distasteful piece of furniture. They had been summoned like him, but under far different circumstances. They were here to witness their own disinheritance. Evelyn Hayes cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. "We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Williamson Callahan." She began, her voice resonating in the quiet room. "I will dispense with the usual legal preamble and proceed to the primary articles of disposition." She read through a list of minor bequests, donations to museums, a trust for his long-serving household staff. Then she reached the core of the document. "To my sons, Robert and Marcus, and my daughter, Eleanor." She read, her eyes not leaving the page. "I leave the sum of $1 each. You were born with my name, but not my grit. You saw your inheritance as a birthright, a finish line you didn't have to run towards. You became soft, waiting for the fruits of my labor to fall into your laps. You have learned nothing of value, and so I leave you with nothing of value." A collective gasp went through the room. Robert the eldest slammed his hand on the table. "This is a farce." The old man was senile. "We'll contest this, Evelyn. I swear to God." "I assure you, Mr. Callahan," Evelyn said coolly, "your father was of perfectly sound mind. He underwent a full psychiatric evaluation at my insistence the day before signing. His reasoning is documented extensively." She turned a page. "Now regarding the residue of the estate." She continued reading, the legalese flowing like a river. It described the vast and complex architecture of the Callahan Empire, the manufacturing plants, the global logistics network, the real estate holdings, the labyrinthine stock portfolio. And at the end of every clause, the same name appeared: Liam Arthur Callahan. When she finished, the silence was venomous. "This is an insult," Eleanor finally hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "To leave everything to him, the boy who spat on this family, who ran away to play in the dirt." Liam remained silent, his hands clasped on the table. He felt their hatred a palpable force. "My instructions are not yet complete," Evelyn said, cutting them off. She looked directly at Liam. "Arthur attached a personal codicil, a set of conditions that you, Liam, must adhere to. He called it the Moral Compass Clause." This piqued everyone's interest. The disinherited siblings leaned forward, a flicker of hope in their eyes. A loophole, a way he could fail. "First," Evelyn read from a separate handwritten page, "you are prohibited from liquidating any of the core assets of Callahan Industries for a period of 10 years. You may not sell the company he built." Liam nodded. He had no intention of doing so. "Second, you are required to establish and personally oversee a new charitable foundation. The Callahan Legacy Foundation capitalized with an initial endowment of $500 million. Its mission is to support vocational training, arts education, and small-scale artisanal businesses across the country." A small, genuine smile touched Liam's lips for the first time. It was as if his grandfather had looked into his soul. He wasn't just giving him money, he was giving him a purpose that aligned with his own values. "Third," Evelyn continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "there is a sealed-off wing in the main Callahan manufacturing plant, Workshop 7. It was your great-grandfather's original workshop where this company began. It has been locked for 50 years. Your grandfather's instruction is that you and you alone are to open it. Inside you will find what he called the true family fortune. You are to use what you find there as your guide." This was a twist no one expected. A mystery. His uncles scoffed. A treasure hunt. The old man really had lost his mind. "And finally," Evelyn said, pausing for effect, "the most crucial condition. Arthur stipulated that you are forbidden from entering into any personal romantic or financial partnership with Alara Vance, formerly Callahan Sterling, or any member of the Sterling family. Any such entanglement will immediately void the will, and the entire estate will be dissolved and its assets donated to a list of pre-selected international charities. The room fell completely silent. Liam stared at her, stunned. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a binding legal firewall. His grandfather hadn't just given him a fortune. He had given him a shield. A shield against the very people who were at that exact moment desperately trying to get back into his life. In that clause, Liam felt the full, complicated weight of his grandfather's final act. It wasn't just about the money. The old man had seen something. He had understood the predatory nature of the world he was throwing his grandson into. He knew who would come crawling out of the woodwork. The inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a test. A final, posthumous lesson in power, loyalty, and the true cost of a name. Before anyone could react to the final, shocking clause, Liam stood up. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I understand the terms, and I accept them." He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving his stunned, seething relatives in his wake. He had a letter from his grandfather to read and a workshop to find. The weight of a billion-dollar empire was on his shoulders, but for the first time he felt like he understood the path forward. It was a path his grandfather had laid for him, a path that led far away from Ilara Vance and the hollow, gilded cage she called a life. The world expected Liam Callahan's first move as a billionaire to be loud. A fleet of sports cars, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a splashy acquisition. The gossip columns were poised, ready to document the carpenter's transformation into a cliché of new money. They were all wrong. For 2 weeks, Liam did nothing. He didn't answer the hundreds of calls and texts that flooded his phone, a significant portion of them from Ilara Chad and Richard Sterling, their tones shifting from panicked to pleading to sycophantic. He ignored the registered letters and extravagant gift baskets that arrived at his workshop. Instead, he spent his time with Evelyn Hayes and a small, hand-picked team of financial advisors working 18-hour days to understand the vast, sprawling empire he now commanded. He learned about supply chains, market caps, and fiduciary duties. It was a language as foreign to him as ancient Greek, but he attacked it with the same methodical focus he applied to a difficult piece of wood. During this time, he finally read his grandfather's letter. It was not an apology, but an explanation. "Liam," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are a very rich man. Do not mistake this for forgiveness. I was and remain furious that you rejected the life I planned for you. But I was also a fool. I spent 50 years building an empire of steel and concrete, only to realize in my final years that it was hollow. I had surrounded myself with yes-men and parasites, including my own children. They have my name, but you have my spirit. The spirit of my father, a man who built this company with his hands, not with leverage buyouts. I watched you from afar, son. I saw you choose integrity over inheritance. I saw you build a life, however small, that was honest. This fortune is a terrible burden. It will attract wolves. It already has. My final gift to you is not the money, but the test that comes with it. Do not become me. Become the man I should have been. Start with Workshop 7. The key is in this envelope." Liam's first public move came on a quiet Tuesday morning. It wasn't an announcement made at a press conference, but a simple act. The old community arts center in his neighborhood, a beloved institution that had given him his first lessons in woodworking as a boy, was being foreclosed on. The building was set to be demolished to make way for luxury condos. The community had been fighting it for months, but they were outmatched and outfunded. Without any fanfare, a newly formed legal entity, the Artisans Holding Group, purchased the building outright for 3 times its market value, settling all the center's debts. The holding group then granted the community center a 100-year lease for the symbolic price of $1 per year. Furthermore, it announced a $5 million grant for renovations and programming expansion. It took the local news less than a day to trace the holding group back to Liam Callahan. The story was the polar opposite of what everyone expected. "Billionaire carpenter saves community arts center," the headlines read. It was a small act, a drop in the ocean of his wealth, but it sent a clear message. Liam Callahan was not going to play by the established rules of the ultra-rich. The news reached Ilara as she was sitting with Chad in a sterile, white-on-white restaurant, picking at a $50 salad. Her phone buzzed with the news alert. She read it, and a complicated emotion, part admiration, part searing regret, twisted in her gut. That was the Liam she remembered, the quiet, kind man who fixed a neighbor's broken chair for free, who volunteered to teach kids how to build birdhouses. Wealth hadn't corrupted him, it had amplified him. "Can you believe this guy?" Chad scoffed, reading the same alert. "What a waste. $5 million on some rundown daycare for starving artists. He could have leveraged that into a $30 million return in the Cayman Islands." He shook his head, a look of genuine disgust on his face. "He's a fool. He has no idea how to handle real money." Alara looked at Chad, at his perfectly manicured nails, his talk of leverage and tax havens, and felt a profound sense of alienation. She remembered Liam explaining the beauty of a mortise and tenon joint, how two pieces of wood could be joined to be stronger than one. Chad's world was about taking things apart, about finding loopholes, about exploiting weaknesses. Liam's was about building things that last. Later that day, her resolve hardened by desperation. She called him again. For weeks, her calls had gone straight to a full voicemail box. This time, to her shock, he answered. "Hello." His voice was the same, yet different. Deeper, more tired, but with an undercurrent of authority she'd never heard before. "Liam, it's Alara." Silence. I saw what you did with the art center. That was really wonderful." "Thank you," he said. The words were polite but cool, freighted with distance. "Listen, Liam, about that night. My father, Chad, they were out of line. I was out of line. I was so caught up in everything, and I am so sorry for how I treated you. For everything." Her apology felt thin, rehearsed, even to her own ears. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear the faint sound of machinery in the background. He was in his workshop. Even now, he was in his workshop. "Apology accepted, Elara," he said finally. His tone was not forgiving. It was the tone of a man closing a ledger, balancing an account. It was the sound of finality. "Good," she said, relieved. "I was hoping maybe we could get a coffee or dinner just to talk, to clear the air properly." "I don't think that's a good idea," he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "My grandfather's will was very specific. I'm sure your father has already had his lawyers look it up. Any association with you or your family would have significant consequences." He was using the will as a shield, just as his grandfather had intended. He was telling her, in the most legally airtight way possible, to stay away. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "The will. Right. I understand. I wish you the best." "Alara," he said, and the words held no warmth. "Goodbye." And he hung up. Alara stared at her phone, the dial tone a dull buzz in her ear. It was over. Truly irrevocably over. She had tried to get back in, and he had calmly, quietly, and completely shut the door. The path back to him wasn't just closed. It had been legally and financially obliterated. Liam's quiet, decisive philanthropy was a pebble dropped in a pond, and the ripples were beginning to rock some very expensive boats. The first to capsize was Chadwick Kensington III. The Kensington family's wealth, while considerable, was largely built on a precarious foundation of leveraged real estate deals, many of which were financed by a subsidiary of Callahan Industries. It was standard practice, but it relied on the goodwill and continued partnership of their primary backer. With Liam at the helm, that goodwill was no longer a given. Chad and his father tried to arrange a meeting. They were politely but firmly rebuffed by Evelyn Hayes, who now acted as Liam's chief of staff. Their calls were routed to junior executives. Their proposals for new ventures were subjected to a level of scrutiny they had never faced before and were ultimately rejected for being over-leveraged and insufficiently collateralized. The message was clear, the free ride was over. The pressure began to expose the cracks in Chad's perfect facade. He became irritable constantly on his phone, snapping at waiters and valets. The effortless charm that had so captivated Alara was replaced by a sour, anxious arrogance. Their conversations, once filled with plans for glamorous trips and society events, now revolved around his complaints about the carpenter and the incompetent fools running Callahan Industries. "He's trying to ruin me, Alara," he'd rant, pacing their living room. "This is all because of you. He's taking it out on me because you left him." "That's not fair, Chad," she'd reply, her voice weak. "This is business. It's personal, and you need to do something about it. Your father needs to do something." Richard Sterling was indeed trying to do something. His own company had a number of supply chain contracts with Callahan subsidiaries. He saw a massive opportunity, a strategic partnership, a merger, a way to latch his wagon to Liam's star. He believed he could use Elara as the ultimate bargaining chip. He summoned her to his office, the city skyline gleaming behind him. "This has gone on long enough," he said, foregoing any preamble. "The man is clearly still in love with you. He's just wounded. We need to orchestrate a reconciliation." "Dad, I told you he won't even speak to me. The will is a piece of paper." Richard slammed his fist on his desk. "It's a bluff, a test from the old man to see if the boy had a spine. You need to be more persuasive. Remind him of the good times. Make him see what he's missing. You are a Sterling. You are going to be a Kensington. We do not get shut out by mechanics." He laid out a plan that made Alara's skin crawl. She was to accidentally run into Liam at one of his favorite coffee shops. She was to feign a crisis, a moment of weakness, appealing to the protective instincts she knew he had. She was to be the damsel in distress, reminding him of a time before lawyers and billions of dollars. "I can't do that," she said, a flicker of her old self, the pre-Chad, pre-Richard-approved self, sparking to life. "It's dishonest. It's manipulative. It's survival," he thundered. "Do you have any idea how much is at stake? The Kensington deal, our own contracts. This isn't a game, Alara. This is our future. Are you going to let your pride destroy everything I have built for you?" That night, Chad came home drunk and furious. One of his father's largest lines of credit had been called in by a bank that it turned out was heavily influenced by the Callahan Financial Group. "They're squeezing us," he snarled, throwing his jacket onto a chair. "That son of a bitch is systematically dismantling my family's legacy." He grabbed her arms, his grip surprisingly tight. "Did you talk to him? Did you fix it?" "No." "Chad, let go of me," she said, frightened by the look in his eyes. "You're useless." He spat, his face contorted in an ugly sneer. "All this time I thought I was getting a prize as Sterling. Turns out I just got the baggage of a billionaire's ex-wife. Maybe I should have just stayed with Tiffany. At least her father's money is real." The words hit her like a slap. Tiffany, a vapid socialite she'd always been rivals with. The carefully constructed illusion of her perfect romance, her perfect life shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't love. It was a merger. And the merger was failing. The final twist came not from Liam, but from an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. The reporter had been digging into the Kensington family's finances, intrigued by their sudden reversal of fortune. What he found was a bombshell. For years, Chadwick Kensington III and his father had been running a sophisticated shell game, using inflated property valuations and fraudulent paperwork to secure loans far beyond their actual worth. They weren't just over-leveraged, they were committing bank fraud. The Callahan Industries review process hadn't been malicious. It had simply been the first time anyone had bothered to look closely enough. The story broke on a Friday. By noon, the SEC had launched a formal investigation. By 5 o'clock, Chad's assets were frozen. Elara was at home when he called. "It's over," he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "They know everything. My lawyers say I'm looking at jail time." There was a pause. "Don't try to contact me." He hung up. She stood in the silent, opulent apartment, a monument to a fraudulent life, and felt nothing but a cold, terrifying emptiness. Her father, implicated in some of the side deals, was facing his own legal firestorm. Her engagement was a fraud. Her father's empire was crumbling. Everything she had chosen, everything she had sacrificed Liam for, was built on a foundation of lies. She was completely, utterly alone, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Liam had probably known all along. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't attacked them. He had simply stepped back and allowed the tide of their own deceit to pull them under. He hadn't destroyed their world. He had simply held up a mirror and it had shattered on its own. With the noise of the Kensingtons and the Sterlings fading into a din of legal battles and public disgrace, Liam finally turned his attention to the mystery his grandfather had left him, Workshop 7. He drove to the main Callahan manufacturing plant, a sprawling complex of brick and steel on the outskirts of the city. He bypassed the modern glass and steel executive building and went to the oldest part of the facility, a section that hadn't been used in decades. He found the door marked with a faded, painted number 7. It was secured with a heavy, old-fashioned padlock. The key from his grandfather's letter, a heavy piece of brass, slid into the lock and turned with a satisfying clunk. The door groaned open, revealing a space lost in time. It wasn't a factory, but a massive cathedral-like workshop, much like his own, but on a grander scale. Sunlight streamed through grimy skylights, illuminating a scene straight from the turn of the 20th century. Antique lathes, planers, and saws stood silent, covered in thick shrouds of dust. Along the walls were stacks of lumber, mahogany, cherry bird's eye maple, all aged to perfection. But the centerpiece of the room was a collection of finished furniture, all draped in canvas cloths. Liam walked to the nearest one and pulled back the cover. It was a roll-top desk, exquisitely crafted with intricate inlays and a finish so deep it looked like liquid. He pulled back another cloth, revealing a dining table that could seat 20, its surface a single, flawless slab of walnut. Another revealed a 4-poster bed with hand-carved posts. This was his great-grandfather's work, the work of the man who started it all, not as an industrialist, but as a master craftsman. Scattered on the workbenches were original hand-drawn schematics, notes on wood types, and ledgers detailing his first sales. This wasn't just a workshop. It was a museum of the company's soul. In the center of the room, on a large drafting table, was a single, large leather-bound book, another letter addressed to him. He opened the letter first. "Liam, this is the true family fortune. Not the stock certificates, but the skill, the patience, the integrity of a job well done. I lost sight of this. I turned this craft into a commodity. My father, your great-grandfather, never wanted that. His dream was to build things that would last for generations. I want you to bring that back. In this ledger, you will find a list of every piece of furniture he ever sold and to whom. Many of the families are still around. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find them, restore them, reconnect the company with its roots, build something that lasts again." Liam opened the ledger. It was a meticulous record of a century of craftsmanship. He looked around the dusty, silent workshop, at the tools his great-grandfather had held, at the wood he had shaped. He understood now. The money was just a tool. The real inheritance was a legacy of purpose. His path was clear. The Callahan Legacy Foundation would not only fund arts and vocational programs, but would also establish a national apprenticeship for master craftsmanship. Callahan Industries would launch a new bespoke division, Callahan Originals, dedicated to creating furniture with the same quality and artistry as his great-grandfather, right here in this workshop. He wouldn't just be a CEO, he'd be a master craftsman, leading from the workbench, not the boardroom. A few months later, a letter arrived at Ilara's new, much smaller apartment. She was working now as a gallery assistant, slowly rebuilding a life on her own terms. Her father's legal troubles had cost them everything. The letter had no return address, but she recognized the simple, clean stationery. It was a legal document. Liam, through an anonymous trust, had settled the remaining debts tied to her name from her marriage to Chad, freeing her from a mountain of legal and financial burdens she had no way of paying. There was no personal note, no explanation. It was a quiet, final act of grace, not of love, not of forgiveness, but of closure. A severing of the last tie that bound them. Tears welled in her eyes. They weren't tears of regret for the lost fortune, but of grief for the good man she had so carelessly thrown away. She finally understood. Liam's worth had never been measured in dollars. It had been in his character, his integrity, his quiet strength. And in the end, that was a fortune she could never get back. The final scene of this story takes place not in a boardroom, but back in Liam's original workshop. He is there with his old friend Sophia Rossi, the cafe owner who had been his steadfast support through everything. They are leaning over a new design, a child's crib, a commission for a local family. He is explaining the joinery, his hands tracing the lines on the paper. "It's about making something strong," he says, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "Something that can be passed down, something real." Sophia smiles at him, a genuine, uncomplicated smile. "You're a good man, Liam Callahan." He looks up, and in the sawdust-filled, sunlit air, he smiles back. He is surrounded by the comforting scent of wood. His hands are covered in honest dust, and for the first time in a very long time, he feels truly, immeasurably rich. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a man inheriting a fortune. It was a story about the true meaning of value. Liam Callahan was called broke when he had everything that mattered: integrity, passion, and a kind heart. The billion-dollar inheritance didn't change who he was. It simply gave him a larger canvas on which to paint his masterpiece of character. Ilara and her family, who measured life in bank statements and social status, learned a brutal lesson. A life built on greed is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. It forces us to ask ourselves, what is our own measure of wealth? Is it the number in our bank account or the strength of our character? Is it what we own or what we build? If this story resonated with you and made you think, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who might appreciate the message. And for more stories that explore the twists and turns of life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. We all have a story to tell, and we'd be honored if you'd continue to listen to ours. Thank you for watching.